Courtney introduced herself to one of my vendors as a managing member of my company on a Tuesday morning in August, and I found out about it through an invoice question by noon. I was at my kitchen island when the call came in. The family calendar was open on the wall by the pantry, the paper one I write in by hand. The vendor on the line was Renee, who had handled linens for our company for 6 years. She did not say hello. She said, "Anna, I want to make sure I'm sending the invoice to the right person. Which of the 3 Hollis partners should I bill?" 3. She said 3. I set the coffee down. I looked at the calendar. I looked at a square from a few weeks earlier, where Daniel had written something in his small, careful printing that I had glanced at and not really read. Courtney partnership call. I had been in Savannah that day. I had assumed Courtney was helping with something small. I had assumed a lot of things. I told Renee to send the invoice to me, the way she had for 6 years. I told her I'd call her back in an hour. Then I sat there and felt something that was not panic and was not anger, but was close to both. The calendar on the wall, with my handwriting and his handwriting all over it, suddenly looked like a record I had not been reading carefully enough. That was the first boundary she treated like a suggestion. If you have ever had someone mistake your kindness for permission to cross every boundary, stay with me. And if this story speaks to you, subscribe for more stories like this, because peace at home is worth protecting. I should tell you about the business first, because the business is the thing she wanted, and the business is the thing she did not understand. Hollis House Events. I named it after the road we lived on the first year Daniel and I were married, a little stretch of pavement outside Athens, Georgia, with a row of old pecan trees and a gravel drive that turned to red mud every spring. We had a small house there. I worked out of the second bedroom for the first 18 months. I made my first 3 contracts at our kitchen table with a printer that jammed every other page. Daniel was on the LLC from the start because we agreed early that whatever we built together, but the work was mine. The clients were mine. The vendor list, the pricing model, the email templates, the contracts, the slow building of a name in a town where people still call you by your maiden name for the first 10 years, no matter what you sign. Mine. By the spring of 2022, we were projecting $2,900,000 in revenue for the year. I want to say that number out loud because Courtney never did. She talked around it. She said the family business and the company and what y'all are building. She never said 2.9. I think saying it would have made her hesitate. The number was too specific to be casual about. Daniel and I had 2 members on the operating agreement, just the 2 of us, 50-50. We had used a real attorney, a woman named Patricia in Atlanta, who had walked us through every clause the year we incorporated. I remember Patricia because she had a habit of tapping her pen on the table when she wanted you to pay attention. She had tapped her pen on the section about adding new members. She had said, in that flat lawyer way, "If you ever change this, you call me first." Daniel had nodded. I had nodded. We had signed. The clause was simple. Any new member required the unanimous written consent of all existing members. All. Both of us. In writing, not a verbal agreement at a Sunday dinner, not a handshake in the driveway, not a handwritten note. Written consent, signed by every existing member. I had not signed anything. So when Renee asked which of the 3 partners should get the invoice, I already knew, in the part of my brain that does not panic, that whatever Daniel had done, it had not actually happened. Not in the way the law looks at it. Whatever was in the drawer in his office was paper. The agreement was the agreement. I just did not know yet how big the paper was, or how long it had been in the drawer. Let me back up to the dinners. Courtney started showing up at our Sunday dinners around the time Daniel's mother passed, which was the fall of 2021. That was understandable. Grief brings people to tables. She was Daniel's only sibling, and the 2 of them had not been close before, but a parent dying can rearrange a family, and I am not the kind of person who pushes anyone away from a table when they need to be there. I set an extra plate, I added a chair, I took the family calendar off the wall and wrote her name in for the 3rd Sunday of every month, in pencil, because I was not sure how long it would last. It lasted. It also grew. By January 2022, she was coming most Sundays. By February, she was bringing her own opinions about the business with her, the way some people bring a casserole. She would ask Daniel questions across the table. How's the company doing? Y'all hiring? I have ideas for some clients I could bring in. She never asked me. She would ask him, with me sitting 4 feet away, as if I were a quiet wife who happened to share an address with the founder of a company, and not the founder. Daniel would look at me. I would look at him. He would say, "Talk to Anna. She's the one who runs it." And Courtney would smile and say, "Oh, of course, of course." And then 30 seconds later, she would ask Daniel another question about the business. I noticed. I did not say anything at the dinner. I made the salad. I poured the wine. I cleared the plates. I did not raise my voice at dinner. I started keeping a note. I will be honest with you, because this is the kind of story where being honest is the only way it makes sense. The note was small at first, just dates, just things she said, Just the time she told my niece, in front of me, that Aunt Anna works very hard, but Daniel is the smart one with money. Just the time she told Daniel, in our living room, that I took on too much and needed help. Just the time she walked into my home office without knocking and looked at the calendar on my desk, the one I keep separate from the kitchen calendar, the one that has my client list, and said, "Wow, that's a lot of names. You should let me help." I should let her help. In March, the first red flag I would later regret not naming out loud, she showed up at a vendor meeting I had not invited her to. We were tasting cakes for a corporate retreat we were planning at a venue in Madison. I had told Daniel about the meeting because he asked what was on my schedule that week. I had not told Courtney anything. She walked into the bakery while I was sitting across from the pastry chef, and she pulled out a chair and sat down, and she said, "I'm part of the family business. I want to taste these too." The pastry chef looked at me. I smiled, the way you smile when you have been raised in the South, and you have been taught that public correction is a sin worse than the thing you are correcting. I said, "Courtney, you should have told me you were coming." And she said, "Daniel told me where you'd be. Daniel told her where I would be." I kept tasting cakes. I picked the lemon. I went home. I did not tell Daniel that night because I wanted to see what he would say first. He said nothing. He came home, kissed my forehead, asked about my day, and went to bed. I lay there for an hour looking at the ceiling fan, and I thought about how a person can be in your bed and on the other side of a wall at the same time. The pastry chef, a woman named Marisol, called me the next morning. She said she did not want to overstep, but she wanted me to know that after I left, Courtney had stayed for another 20 minutes and had asked her about pricing, about exclusivity, about whether Hollis House Events had a preferred vendor agreement. Marisol said she had answered carefully, the way you answer when you know something is off, but you do not yet know what. She said, "Anna, I just felt like you should know." I thanked her. I wrote it in my note. I did not tell Daniel about that call either. In April, the second red flag, Courtney emailed a corporate client of mine, directly, from a personal email address, using the name Hollis House Events in the signature. I only found out because the client, a man named Greg, who runs HR for a regional bank, replied to me 3 days later with a forwarded chain. He wrote, "Anna, who is Courtney Hollis?" She reached out about coordinating our December event. I assumed she was on your team, but wanted to confirm. I sat in my office and read the email 3 times. The signature said her name, and underneath it, in a font she had picked, it said Hollis House Events. There was no title. There was no email address from my company. There was a personal Gmail. She had reached out to one of my biggest clients, a contract worth more than $40,000, and pitched herself as if she were part of my team. I picked up the phone, and I called Daniel at his office. I asked him if he knew. He said, "She mentioned wanting to help with a few things. I told her to ask you first." I said, "She did not ask me." He said, "I'll talk to her." I said, "I will." I did not call her that day. I needed a night. I want to pause here and tell you something about silence, because I think it is the most misunderstood part of being a wife in a family that has decided what role you play. Silence is not weakness. Silence is sometimes the only place where you can think clearly enough to figure out what is actually happening. I went to bed that night, and I did not sleep much, and in the morning I called Courtney from my car, parked outside a coffee shop on the way to a site visit, with the window cracked because it was warm for April. I was calm. I told her that emailing my clients without my knowledge was not appropriate. I told her that representing the company without being part of the company was not appropriate. I told her that if she had ideas for the business, she could bring them to me and we could talk. She said, "Anna, I'm just trying to help. There's no need to make this so corporate. As if a $40,000 contract should be handled by feel." She said, "Daniel knows, it's fine. Daniel knows, it's fine." I hung up, I sat in the car, I drank my coffee, I went to my site visit, I came home, I made dinner, I wrote it down in my note. That was the second boundary she treated like a suggestion. The third one was the calendar. I want to slow down here, because the calendar is the part of this story that still gets me, even now, when I tell it. The family calendar in our kitchen is not just a schedule, it is a record. It has been on the wall in every house Daniel and I have lived in since we got married. The first one was a free promotional calendar from a hardware store in Athens. The second one was a real one I bought at a stationery shop on King Street in Charleston on a weekend trip the year my niece was born. The current one is from the same shop, the one I order every December, the one with the small square days and the cream-colored paper. I write our anniversary on it every year. I write Daniel's mother's birthday on it, even now, 2 years after she passed. I write site visits and vendor calls and grocery runs and the days my sister flies in. It is the most domestic thing in our house, and it is also, in a way I did not understand until that August, a kind of legal document of how a marriage spends its time. In July of 2022, I came home from a long Tuesday, and I was making tea at the counter, and I glanced at the calendar, and I saw a notation in Daniel's printing on a Friday I was scheduled to be in Savannah. It said, "Courtney Partnership Call, 3 words, partnership call. I read it twice. I told myself it was a casual word, the way people say we're partnering on a project, when they mean 2 people are doing one thing together. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself Daniel would tell me about it when he was ready. I drank my tea. I went to bed. I did not ask him. That is the part I have to own. I did not ask him because some part of me already knew, and I did not want to know yet. I wanted to be in Savannah on Friday. I wanted to do my site visit. I wanted to come home to a house that had not changed. I came home Friday night, and the calendar still said the same thing, and Daniel did not bring it up, and I did not bring it up. And the next Sunday, Courtney came to dinner and laughed too loud at her own joke about how she was going to be in the family in a whole new way soon. And I smiled, and I cleared the plates, and I wrote 2 more lines in my note. That was the first time I understood that something had already happened that I did not know about yet. The text was sent at 11 p.m. The deed was dated 3 years earlier. I am going to come back to the calendar, because the calendar is where this story turns. But first I have to tell you about Tuesday morning in August, because Tuesday morning in August is when Renee called and asked which of the 3 Hollis partners should get the invoice, and that is when the not knowing stopped. I called Renee back. I told her there were 2 members of the LLC, 2, Daniel and me. I asked her what Courtney had said to her. Renee was quiet for a moment, in the way good vendors are quiet when they realize they have walked into something that is not their fault and is not going to be cleaned up by them. She told me that Courtney had been at a tasting in late July, that Courtney had introduced herself as one of the managing partners, that Courtney had given Renee a phone number and said, "If anything comes up about contracts, you can reach me directly." That Renee, being a professional, had filed it away and was now looking at an invoice and trying to figure out who to send it to. I thanked her. I told her that I would handle it. I told her, in the calmest voice I had, that no contracts at Hollis House events were ever to be discussed with anyone other than me, and that any communication from Courtney was not authorized by the company. Renee said, "Got it, Anna. I'm sorry." I said, "You did the right thing by calling." I hung up. I closed my laptop. I walked to Daniel's home office. The door was open. He was not there. He was at his real office in town that day, the one for his actual job. The home office was where we kept the file cabinet. The filing cabinet had a top drawer for personal documents and a second drawer for the LLC. I opened the second drawer. Some doors do not close loudly. They close legally. There was a folder labeled in his handwriting, HHE Amendment 2022. I had not made that folder. I had not labeled that folder. I had not seen that folder. I pulled it out. There was a single document inside, 2 pages. Handwritten on a yellow legal pad, his printing, his signature at the bottom, Courtney's signature next to his, a date in May. The amendment said that Courtney Hollis was being added as a 1/3 member of Hollis House Events LLC, in recognition of her contributions to the family business and her role in client development. It said her 1/3 interest was effective immediately. There was no signature line for me. There was no signature for me. There was no place where my name was printed and a line drawn for my name, and then left blank, which would have been almost gentler. There was just no me on the page at all, as if I had been removed from the company by being left off a piece of paper. I sat in his chair. I read it again. I read it 3 times. I did not cry. I did not yell. I took a picture of both pages with my phone. I put the folder back in the drawer, exactly where I had found it. I closed the drawer. I walked to the kitchen, and I looked at the family calendar on the wall, and I looked at every notation in his printing for the last 6 months, and I started to see them differently. Courtney partnership call on a Friday I was out of town. C dropping by office on a Wednesday I had a vendor meeting. C paperwork on a Monday in May, the same week as the date on the amendment. The calendar had been telling me I had not been reading it carefully enough. I did not raise my voice at dinner. I saved the message. I went back to my own home office. I took the original LLC operating agreement out of my filing cabinet, the one Patricia had given us in a leather portfolio the day we incorporated. I read every clause. I read the membership section twice. I read the section about amendments 3 times. The clause was exactly where I remembered it. Section 4.3, admission of new members. Mission of no person shall be admitted as a member of the company without the unanimous written consent of all existing members. Unanimous. Written. All. I had not consented. There was no consent. The amendment in the drawer was paper. It was not a contract. It was not an addition to anything. It was a piece of yellow legal pad with 2 signatures on it that, under Georgia law and under our own agreement, did not do what they thought they were doing. I want to tell you what I felt at that moment because I think it matters. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel relief. I felt grief. Specifically, I felt grief about the family calendar in the kitchen. Because I understood, sitting there at my desk with the operating agreement in my lap, That the man I had been writing notations with on a paper calendar for 6 years had been writing different notations on a different piece of paper, and he had not told me, and his sister had been signing it. The key was not the problem, the entitlement was. I did not confront him that night. I cooked dinner, we ate, we talked about a window that needed to be replaced upstairs. He kissed me on the head when we went to bed. I let him. The next morning, after he left for work, I called Patricia in Atlanta. Patricia remembered me. Patricia remembered the pen tap. Patricia listened to me describe the amendment, the dates, the vendor calls, the email to Greg, the calendar notations, the dinners, the tasting in March. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she said, "Anna, send me a picture of both pages and a copy of the original agreement. I'll have a notice drafted by end of day tomorrow." I said, "I want it sent to Courtney first, before Daniel." Patricia paused. She said, "That's an unusual sequence." I said, "I know." She said, "Tell me why." I told her why. I told her that I was not going to embarrass my husband by serving him a legal notice in his own house. I told her I was going to give him the chance to be the one who walked into the kitchen and said, out loud, what he had done. I told her that whatever he chose to do or not do, the legal piece of this had to go to Courtney directly, because Courtney was the one telling vendors she was a managing member, and Courtney was the one who needed to hear, in writing, from a lawyer, that she was not. Patricia said, "Okay." Then she said, "Anna, I'm sorry." I said, "Don't be, I'm not done." 2 days later, the letter went out. It was 3 pages. It was on Patricia's letterhead. It cited Section 4.3 of the Operating Agreement, and it cited Georgia Statute OCGA, Section 1411-401, which is the section of Georgia LLC law that governs the admission of new members, and which says, in plainer words than the statute uses, that you cannot just decide to become a member of a company. You have to be admitted in the way the operating agreement describes. If the agreement says unanimous written consent, then it says unanimous written consent, and a handwritten amendment signed by one of 2 members and a third party is not consent. It is a piece of paper. The letter informed Courtney that the May amendment was void as a matter of law. It informed her that she had no membership interest in Hollis House Events LLC. It informed her that representing herself to vendors, clients, or any third party as a member of the LLC constituted a misrepresentation, and that further such representations would be addressed through additional legal action. It informed her that any communications with clients of Hollis House Events were to cease immediately. It was not cruel. It was not loud. It was 3 pages of citations and clauses. Patricia sent it Wednesday morning. Courtney received it Wednesday afternoon. Courtney's own attorney called her late Wednesday afternoon. I know about the call because Daniel told me that night when he came home from work and sat down at the kitchen table where the family calendar was visible from the chair he was in, and he put his keys on the table, and he said, "Courtney called me. She's upset." I said, "Tell me what she said." He said, "She said her lawyer told her she's not a member of the company. She said she does not understand. She said she signed something." I said, "She did. So did you." He looked at me. I looked at him. The kitchen was very quiet. The family calendar on the wall had a notation on Sunday for dinner. I had written it in pencil. I said, "I found the folder in your office on Tuesday. I read it. I called Patricia. The amendment is void. It was never valid. Section 4.3 of our operating agreement requires unanimous written consent of all existing members. I did not consent. I was not asked. The letter went out this morning." He did not say, "I'm sorry," first. That is the part I will tell you honestly. The first thing he said was, "She told me you knew." Courtney told him I knew. I said, "I did not know." He said, "I thought you knew. She said you were comfortable with it. She said you and her had talked at a dinner." I said, "We never talked. There was nothing to talk about. There was nothing to be comfortable with. You signed an amendment to a company you co-own with me, adding a third member without asking me. There is no version of that conversation where I was comfortable with it." He put his hands on the table. He looked at the calendar. He said, "I should have asked you." I said, "Yes." He said, "I thought I was helping the family." I said, "You were helping her." He did not argue. That is the only reason this story has the ending it has, and I want to be careful not to make him sound better than he was, because what he did was wrong, and what he did almost cost us 1/3 of a business I built from a kitchen table with a printer that jammed every other page. But he did not argue. He sat at the table, and he listened, and when I was done talking, he asked me what I needed. I told him. I needed him to call Courtney and tell her, in his own words, that the amendment had been a mistake, that he should not have signed it without me, that she was not a member of the company and was never going to be a member of the company, and that any further contact with vendors or clients of Hollis House Events would result in additional legal action that he, as a member of the LLC, would not stop. I needed him to send me a copy of every email between him and Courtney about the business, every text, every voicemail, all of it. I needed Patricia to draft a second amendment, a real one, that strengthened Section 4.3 with specific language about handwritten amendments, side agreements, and verbal understandings, and we would both sign it. I needed him to tell his family, the cousins, and the aunts that there had been a misunderstanding about the business, and that the misunderstanding was now resolved, and that no one in the extended family was a member of the LLC except him and me. I needed him to take Courtney's name off the family calendar for the next 3 months. Not forever. 3 months. I needed a season of Sundays where I did not have to set the extra plate. He did all of it. He called Courtney that night. I did not listen to the call. I did not need to. He stood on the back porch and I stayed in the kitchen. And when he came back inside, he sat down across from me and he told me what he had said. It was very short. He had told her the amendment was void. He had told her he should not have signed it. He had told her she was not part of the business. He had told her he loved her, but he had been wrong, and he was not going to be wrong about this again. He showed me the emails the next morning. There were more than I expected. She had been working him for months. She had been telling him I was overworked. She had been telling him I did not really want a third partner, but I would come around. She had been telling him that bringing her in would help him, would give him more of a say in his own family business. The phrase more of a say appeared 4 times in the emails. There was one email in particular that I read 3 times. She had written it to him in early May, the week before they signed the amendment. She said in plain language that I would come around once the paperwork was done. She said the word paperwork like it was a small thing. She said that once it was signed, I would see the value of having her involved, and that the conversation would be easier to have after the fact. She said the word easier. Easier for whom, I thought, sitting at my kitchen island with my second cup of coffee, looking at an email a woman I had been feeding on Sundays had written to my husband about how to manage me. I did not respond to the email. It was not addressed to me. I just made sure I had a copy. He had not been the architect. He had been the door she walked through. That does not make it less wrong. It just changes the shape of it. I read every email twice. I made a folder on my desktop. I named it the date she had first emailed Greg. I dragged the messages in one at a time. I did not delete any of them. I did not respond to any of them. I let them sit there, time stamped and counted, because I had learned by then that the difference between a conversation and a record is whether you wrote it down. I had been writing things down for months. I had not realized until that morning that he had been writing different things down too, and that what we had each kept on paper was going to matter more than anything we had said at the kitchen table. Patricia drafted the new amendment. We both signed it in her office in Atlanta on a Friday afternoon. She tapped her pen on the page, in the same way she had 3 years earlier, on the same clause. She said, "Don't change this." We did not. The new language was specific. Any amendment to the operating agreement required a written instrument signed by all existing members and notarized. No handwritten amendments, no verbal understandings, no side agreements, no, we talked about it at dinner. If it was not on the official document, signed and notarized by both of us, it did not exist. I want to tell you something about the Sunday after the letter went out, because that is the part that changed how I think about boundaries. Courtney did not come to dinner. She had been told not to. Daniel had told her on the phone the night before that the next 3 months were a pause and that we would talk again at Thanksgiving. He did not say it angrily. He said it firmly. He said it the way a brother says something to a sister when he has decided who his wife is. The kitchen was quiet that Sunday. I made a roast. I set 2 plates. I poured 2 glasses of wine. The family calendar on the wall had no notation for Courtney because I had taken her name off, in pencil, the way I had written it in pencil to begin with. The square for that Sunday just said our names. Daniel and Anna, the way it had said for the first 8 years of our marriage. He looked at the calendar at one point during dinner. He did not say anything. He just looked at it, and then he looked at me, and he said, "Thank you for not making this loud." I said, "It did not need to be loud. It needed to be over." He nodded. We ate. We did not talk about the business. We talked about a movie we had been meaning to watch. We talked about my sister's plans to come down for Labor Day. We talked about whether to repaint the back porch. We were 2 people at a table with a calendar on the wall, and the calendar had our names on it, and that was all the calendar needed to say. 3 weeks later, Renee called me again, this time about an actual invoice for an actual event. She asked me a normal question about a delivery time. I gave her a normal answer. Before we hung up, she said, "Anna, I just want to say, I'm really glad you called me back that day." I told her I was too. I told her she had done the right thing. I told her I was lucky to work with vendors who pick up the phone. I want to be careful here, because I do not want to leave you with the impression that everything was fixed by a letter. Marriage does not work that way. Daniel and I went to a counselor in Athens for 6 months after that summer. We did the work. We talked about why he had not asked me. We talked about why he had wanted to please his sister at the cost of his wife. We talked about his mother and grief and the way Courtney had moved into the empty space their mother left behind, and how he had let her because the alternative was facing how much he missed his mother and how much he did not know how to hold that. We talked about a lot of things that have nothing to do with Section 4.3 or OCGA 1411-401. What I will tell you is that the legal piece made the marriage piece possible. If the amendment had stood, if Courtney had ended up with a third of the company, no amount of counseling would have fixed what that did to me. The fact that the agreement we had signed 3 years earlier had already protected us, on paper, before any of this happened, is what gave me the room to forgive him. The wall held. The clause held. Patricia's pen tap, 3 years earlier, held. That is what I want you to take away from this, if you take anything. The agreements you sign when nothing is wrong are the agreements that save you when something is. The boundary you write into a document at the beginning, when everyone is happy and the room is full of nodding and pens, is the boundary that does the work later, when one person has decided to test it and another person is sitting at a kitchen island with a coffee cup and an invoice question. I will not pretend I do not still feel it sometimes. I look at the calendar on the wall, and I see the months when I should have been paying closer attention. I see the notations I glanced at and did not read. I see the Sundays I set the extra plate. I see the cake tasting in March. I see Greg's email in April. I see the Friday in July when Courtney partnership call was written in my husband's small, careful printing, and I was in Savannah, not asking the question I should have asked. I do not blame myself. I was being a good sister-in-law in a family that had recently lost a mother. I was being a good wife to a man who was grieving. I was being the person I have always been, which is the person who sets the extra plate. The thing I learned is that you can be that person and still be a person who reads the calendar carefully. You can be kind and still keep the operating agreement in a leather portfolio in the second drawer of your filing cabinet. You can pour the wine at Sunday dinner and still know in the back of your mind what Section 4.3 says. Kindness is not the absence of attention. Kindness, the real kind, the kind that lasts, is attention with grace on top of it. Courtney came back to dinner at Thanksgiving. She was quieter. She did not ask Daniel any questions about the business. She did not ask me any questions about the business. She brought a pie. She helped clear the plates. We did not talk about what had happened, because it had been said in a letter, and the letter had said everything. The family calendar on the wall has her name on it again, in pencil, for 1 Sunday a month. Not 3. 1. That is what I decided. Daniel agreed. We did not need to discuss it for long. Hollis House Events did $3,100,000 in revenue that year. We beat the projection. I want to say that out loud, because Courtney never did. $3,100,000. I built that. I built it at a kitchen table in a house off a road in Athens, with a printer that jammed every other page, with a husband who put his name on the LLC, because we agreed early that whatever we built together. The agreement held, the marriage held, the home held. Some doors do not close loudly. Some doors close because the agreement you signed 3 years earlier says they do, and a lawyer in Atlanta puts it on letterhead, and a handwritten amendment in a yellow legal pad turns out to be exactly what it always was, which is paper. The family calendar still hangs in the kitchen. I still write our anniversary on it every year. I still write Daniel's mother's birthday on it. I still order a new one every December from the same stationery shop in Charleston. I still write our names in the squares, in pencil, the way I have always written them. I read the calendar more carefully now. That is the change. That is the only change that mattered. And if stories like this remind you that boundaries are not cruelty, subscribe to my channel for more stories. Because sometimes protecting your peace is the strongest thing you can do. I will tell you one more thing before I go. The afternoon Patricia's letter arrived at Courtney's house. Courtney called her own attorney. I learned this later from Daniel, who learned it from Courtney's husband, who told him at a cousin's birthday party that fall. Courtney's attorney read the letter, read our operating agreement, read the Georgia statute, and called Courtney back within 2 hours. He told her, in plain words, that the amendment was not enforceable, that she had no claim to any portion of the company, that the projection of $2,900,000 was not, and had never been, hers in any part, that she should not contact any vendor, any client, or any third party associated with Hollis House Events, that she should consider the matter closed. She sat in her own kitchen, I am told, and she cried. Her husband called Daniel that night and asked, in the kind of awkward voice men use when they are trying to clean up something that is not theirs to clean up, whether there was any way to walk this back. Daniel told him there was not. He told him the amendment had never been valid in the first place. He told him this was not a punishment, it was a correction. There was nothing to walk back. There was only what had always been true. I do not say that to be cruel. I say it because I think she had genuinely convinced herself that what she was doing was reasonable, that she deserved a stake, that a handwritten amendment with 2 signatures was the same thing as a contract, that family was bigger than law, that her brother loving her meant her brother could give her something that did not belong to him alone. She was wrong about all of it. The agreement told her she was wrong. The statute told her she was wrong. Her own attorney told her she was wrong. And by the time the sun went down, on the day the letter arrived, she understood, in the only way that mattered, that the agreements you sign matter more than the dinners you attend. I poured myself a glass of wine that night. I sat at the kitchen island. I looked at the family calendar on the wall. The square for that day was blank. I picked up the pencil I keep in the drawer, and I wrote, in small letters, in the corner of that day's square, 2 words. It held. That is all the calendar needed to say.